Welcome back. Paytm Karo, but for how long? Troubles for the Indian fintech giant seem to be never-ending. Despite its widespread popularity and dominance in the Indian fintech landscape, Paytm finds itself embroiled in a series of ongoing challenges. The latest development involves the Enforcement Directorate initiating an investigation into Paytm Payments Bank for suspected violation of foreign exchange regulations. Now, there has been no official statement from either Paytm or the ED regarding these allegations. The scrutiny definitely, though, is adding to the mounting pressure on the company. In response to speculation, Paytm Payments Bank is showcasing India's commitment to digital innovation and financial inclusion on the international scale. As Paytm navigates through regulatory challenges and intensifying competition, its further trajectory remains uncertain. Ashneer Grover, former founder of BharatPe, spoke to me last week on the Paytm mess. Here's an excerpt of that conversation. Ashneer, as always, thank you very much for your time. The last couple of weeks and months have been fairly shaky for the startup world because two of the biggest names in the business, Byju and Paytm, are facing an existential crisis. What went wrong?
Thanks for having me on the show. See, it's sad that two of the biggest startups are in this position. And when I say biggest, these are the only two startups in India who have ever hit a $20 billion plus valuation, right? Both are in the news for very, very different reasons. But I think one thing, which will come out of it very clearly is there seems to be a $20 billion glass ceiling, right? So the moment you hit that glass ceiling, it seems the only way to go is down. And which is one thing I want to delve a bit deeper into, saying that structurally, we in India are not ready for big startups, right? जैसे कुछ बड़ा होता है कुछ ना कुछ दुर्घटना हो जाती है, right? And one way to think of it is इंडिया में जितना भी स्टार्टअप स्पेस है वो over the last 10 to 12 years organically develop हुआ है. Now the government में सब लोग फोटो खिंचवाने के लिए तैयार हैं फाउंडर्स के साथ, बट कोई लेजिस्लेशन लाने के लिए कोई प्रोएक्टिव काम करने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, right? If you look at it in the country, is there any law being made for startups? Do you have a system of systematically important startups? आप एनबीएफसी की बात करते हैं, किसी की 100 करोड़ के ऊपर नेटवर्थ हो जाती है एनबीएफसी की, हम उसको सिस्टमैटिकली इंपॉर्टेंट एनबीएफसी बोलने लगते हैं, राइट? We have 111 unicorns, but none of us consider them as systematically important for the economy or otherwise. But the fact is, the startups, if you minus the startups in India over the last 10 years, you will actually have a negative growth rate of GDP. So we are celebrating 6%, 7.5% GDP growth rates in the country. You minus the startups and you tell me what is your growth rate as a country. So startups have brought in the maximum amount of foreign investment in the country. They have created the maximum number of jobs. But unfortunately, at the legislative class, at the political class, they have seen zero support. And therefore, when they are becoming big, and as they are becoming big, you are seeing all these problems play out in the public, right? Which could have easily been avoided if you had a slightly more proactive approach of the government towards startup and their problems, or the startups as a community were more represented at the
111 unicorns तो हैं इंडिया में, but the fact also is that it's not like the founders have abandoned, say for example Paytm. They've all written to the Prime Minister's office, to Nirmala Sitharaman, to take a look at Paytm's case more closely. Many of them are privately calling this overreach. Paytm, for example, is in India's social milieu. We may be doing GPay, we still say Paytm karo. Vijay Shekhar Sharma has built a huge successful startup, but clearly kuch gadbad hui hai. Things have gone wrong. Why would the RBI crack down on them otherwise?
So see, here's the thing. Paytm is the father of all fintechs in India. I built BharatPe, right? And I have no qualm in telling you that if Paytm was not there, there would have been no BharatPe, right? Because Paytm is the guy who taught people that you can open an app in your phone and scan a goocher moocher thing called as QR code, and money will flow from your account to that account, right? So those are the guys who basically built the behavior in India. And on top of it, then, Google Pay and Phone Pay came on the consumer side. Players like BharatPe and Pine Labs came on the merchant side, and the whole ecosystem was built, right? So Paytm is the source. It's the mother in some sense, right? And therefore, for us as a startup community, it's absolutely sad, right? One can always take a view that, I could be benefiting because, a bit of business would flow to BharatPe out of it. But that's not years. It has been operating that almost 5 years has been operating the payments bank, and it was due to get a small finance bank license from here on. Right? I think the sad part is by, in some sense, effectively canceling the payments bank license, right? They've told Paytm you're not going to get a small finance bank license either, right? Because that was the next step, logical step, right? Now, why has it happened? See, here's the thing. Anyone who is an innovator, who's a pioneer, right, will expand the market. When you are expanding the market, you are operating at the fringes. You are operating at so-called the boundary condition, right? Now, sometimes the boundary condition, someone would believe that boundary has been, trespassed. Someone would believe you're within the boundary, right? But RBI is taking a view that, Paytm has done such a big sin that it has to be punished by canceling their license in effect, right? Which I think is a very, very and why is that view? Because fundamentally in RBI, all people who operate, take the calls are 60-year-olds. They have handled a system of banks, right? Uh, but they don't have a faith in a 40-year-old guy who's a maverick running any system. That is at the core of it. We as Indians do, especially those in power, those who are making the regulations, have zero faith in a 40-year-old guy who comes from HDFC Bank a few years back, was told to stop onboarding new credit cards, right? And they're the biggest private bank, right? तो गलती तो उन्होंने भी कुछ की होगी, बट आपने क्या HDFC बैंक को बोल दिया अब से तुम धंधा नहीं करोगे, right? Why? Because it's the biggest private bank and it's systematically important for you. The fact is, in your view of RBI, Paytm is not systematically important. If it dies, right? How do we care? Is the attitude, right? And therefore, you taking a punitive action which just does not justify whatever wrongs have happened. What could have been wrong? Yeah, as an RBI regulated entity on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, there's so many reportings which are happening. You are looking at the affair at the bank. It has a board. It has independent board members, right? All of a sudden, what great sin has Paytm done that this action is necessitated? So I think it is overreach, and I will not mince my words. It's an overreach, and in some sense, it is telling the fintechs key boss in the RBI view of world, banks have importance. Fintechs don't have any importance.
This is very important. You're saying the RBI's decision on Paytm is actually an overreach. Okay. Let's talk about Byju's. Byju's board wants the founder out. It's a fight now which is out in the open. What went wrong?
So I think, see, in the case of Byju's as well, right? I think it's classic how the US investors operate, right? When the company is growing, they are just happy to pump in money at whatever valuation. They will fall head over heels to come into the company, right? And they would be supportive of anything that the company is doing, right? one spell of bad time, and then they are trying to find a scapegoat, saying who did wrong, right? The thing is, Byju's was as a company, when it bought Akash or when it bought Whitehead Jr. and it paid out cash, let's say $300 million or $1 billion to these companies, that money was coming from the investors either as equity or was being facilitated by the same investors as loans to Byju's, right? So all of you signed off on him making those big bets, right? Because education is a big sector in India. It's recession proof, and you thought Byju's will become the was moving online. The moment schools opened and physical things started, physical also became big, and therefore Byju's growth slowed down, or would have seen some certain parts of the businesses would have seen a downturn, right? Now, one thing is to support the founder, understand the market, that it's the market, and support the founder. The other is saying, oh, we don't know what was happening, right? And I find it's absolutely funny. It's also happened with me in the past, right? But these same investors who get monthly MISs, who are sitting on the board, right? Who are signing multiple documents through which fundraisers happen. They're part of multiple diligences. One fine day, they have this realization, oh, that we don't know what was happening. And it is the promoter who was running everything. Now, my point here is simply this. Are we running proprietorships? Right? Is Ravindran Byju a proprietor? Or he is the founder, CEO of a private limited company in which multiple investors have looked into the affairs of the company. It has a board, it has auditors, right? So how does it become the challenge is the investors are not willing to understand businesses goes through down as well. And when they go through down, your main bet, which is the founder, needs to be supported. Here, the culture has become that the main bet, who's the founder, let's pull the rug from under his feet, right? Let's make him the bad guy. Let's make him the villain, right? And I don't understand what it solves. It only leads the company and the business to become zero in some sense. Who becomes big faster has a better chance of existence. When you have these 2 to 3 players in every segment, then they start focusing on profitability, which happens 6 to 8 years into it. So that's been the trend in every sector. If you look at Policy Bazaar, they said they've made a maiden profit in the last quarter of 37 crores odd. If you look at Zomato, they have made a profit. Paytm was heading near profitability, right? So by nature, these are businesses which are scale first, profitability later. Nothing new in this. Even in the US, you have the same system, right? The internet businesses, the startup businesses are capital intensive, right? They need capital in the initial phases. They make losses, and once they reach a certain scale, there is acceptability, and it becomes a habit-forming business. Then you start making profits. I think this concept of that every business needs to make profit from day one is a very misplaced concept in the new age. And again, I'm saying it's the 60-year-olds taking out their frustration on the 40-year-olds.
Okay. Ashneer, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Good to get your perspective. Good to get the perspective of startups, seeing the fact that 2 of its superstars are in big trouble right now. Thank you very much. Good to have you on the show.